The suburban street was a postcard of American normal sign-eat lawns, pastel houses, and the soft hum of routine. But for Stephanie, confined to her bedroom after a soccer injury, the view from her window had become a prison of monotony. 3 days of bed rest stretched into an eternity, and boredom gnawed at her like a persistent itch. At 16, she was restless, her mind craving something to break the dull rhythm of recovery. She began watching her neighbors, their lives unfolding like a silent film through her binoculars. The couple in number 12 left for work at 7:45 sharp. Mrs. Corbett in number 11 flicked her lights on and off. A quirk Stephanie later learned was due to Tourette's triggering a clap-on, clap-off lamp. But it was the man in number 10, Bob Clark, who caught her eye and held it. Bob was an enigma. He mowed his lawn in a crisp suit and tie, his movements precise, almost mechanical. Stephanie watched him one Saturday, sweat beading on his brow but his posture rigid, as if defying the heat to disrupt his control. She mentioned it to her father, Jim, over breakfast, expecting a laugh. "Probably just eccentric," Jim said, stirring his coffee with a tired smile. But Stephanie wasn't so sure. There was something about Bob's eyes sharp, calculating, like a predator sizing up prey. One night, as she adjusted her binoculars, she froze. Bob stood at his upstairs window, staring directly at her. The distance between their houses didn't dull the chill of his gaze. Her heart thudded, and she dropped the binoculars, suddenly aware of how exposed she felt. Jim noticed her unease but chalked it up to cabin fever. "You need to rest, Steph," he said, his voice gentle but strained. Since her mother's death 2 years ago, Jim had carried a quiet grief, burying himself in work to avoid the silence of their home. He tried to be there for Stephanie, but his long shifts at the hardware store left her alone more often than he liked. "Just focus on getting better," he urged, ruffling her hair before heading out. But Stephanie couldn't let it go. She confided in her boyfriend Danny and her friend Melissa, who came over to keep her company. Flipping through an old true crime magazine she'd found in the attic, Stephanie stopped at an article about John List, a New Jersey accountant who'd murdered his family in 1971 and vanished. The grainy black and white photo of List stared back at her square jaw, piercing eyes, a face eerily similar to Bob Clark's. "It's him," she whispered, her voice trembling with conviction. "I know it is." Danny, sprawled on her bed with a soda, raised an eyebrow. "Come on, Steph. That's a stretch. Guy's probably just a weird neighbor." Melissa, flipping her braid, agreed. "You're bored out of your mind. Doesn't mean he's a serial killer." But Stephanie wasn't swayed. She pointed out Bob's quirkish obsessive tidiness, the way he quoted Bible verses to Mrs. Atherton next door, his insistence on control. She'd overheard him once, correcting his wife, Dolores, about a dress for a church benefit. "It's too revealing," he'd said, his tone calm but unyielding. "Find something modest." To Stephanie, it wasn't just prudishness, it was domination, a trait the article had pinned on John List, who'd orchestrated his family's lives with meticulous precision before ending them. Across the country, Detective Frank Clayton sat in his cluttered office, surrounded by files and ghosts. For 18 years, he'd chased John List, the man who'd shot his wife, mother, and 3 children in their Westfield home, then disappeared. The crime scene haunted Frank's 3 teenagers, Frederick, John Jr., and Patricia, sprawled in pools of blood, their dreams snuffed out by the father meant to protect them. His department had closed the case years ago, calling it colder than Alaska, but Frank couldn't let go. "They deserve justice," he told his partner, Wayne Harris, who'd retired but still humored Frank's obsession. "He's out there, living like nothing happened." Frank's latest hope was America's Most Wanted, a new TV show that profiled fugitives and relied on viewer tips to catch them. He met with the host, John Wesley, whose own tragedy his son Aaron's murder had inspired the show. Frank pleaded for List's case to air, but the producer, Ellen Phillips, hesitated. "It's too old," she said, flipping through Frank's file. One blurry photo from 1971, he could look completely different now. Undeterred, Frank enlisted Dave Brenton, a forensic artist who sculpted age-progressed busts of fugitives. "Give me something the public can recognize," Frank urged. Dave nodded, studying List's photo. "I'll factor in aging, lifestyle, maybe a change in glasses or hairstyle. It's speculative, but it's our best shot." Back in the neighborhood, Stephanie's fixation grew. She watched Bob's house obsessively. Noting his agitation one afternoon, he paced his kitchen, then hurled a magazine across the room, his face twisted with rage. "He's hiding something," she told Danny, who was growing uneasy. "You're creeping me out, Steph. What if he's just a grumpy old guy?" But Stephanie had a plan. Bob and Dolores attended church every Sunday, leaving their house empty from 8:30 to noon. "There's a spare key under a plant pot by their front door," she said, her eyes gleaming. "You could sneak in. Look for evidence, an old photo, a document, anything that proves he's John List." Danny balked. "That's breaking and entering, Steph. I could go to jail." But her pleading wore him down. "If he's List, the cops won't care about a stolen photo, they'll care about catching a murderer." Reluctantly, Danny agreed, slipping into the Clarks' house one Sunday while Stephanie waited, heart pounding. The house was a shrine to order books aligned perfectly, not a speck of dust. Danny found nothing incriminating, just a photo of Bob and Dolores at a church picnic, smiling stiffly. "It's too clean," he told Stephanie later, shaken. "Like he's erased his past. I'm not doing that again." The stakes rose when Bob confronted Danny. Stephanie had sent Danny to watch Bob's house, hoping to catch him off guard. Instead, Bob caught Danny climbing into his car one evening. "I know you and Stephanie have been snooping," Bob said, his voice low and menacing. "I value my privacy, and you do well to respect it. I'm watching you too." Danny's face paled as he recounted the encounter to Stephanie, who felt a mix of fear and vindication. "He's scared," she said. "That means we're close." That night, Jim settled on the couch, flipping to America's Most Wanted. Stephanie, restless, joined him, her mind still on Bob. When John Wesley's voice announced a segment on John List, her breath caught. On November 9th, 1971, a mild-mannered accountant and churchgoer, John List, murdered his entire family, Wesley said. The screen showed Dave Brenton's bust-a-face that matched Bob Clark's down to the heavy glasses and thinning hair. "Dad, it's him!" Stephanie gasped, gripping Jim's arm. "Across the street, it's John List!" Jim frowned, torn between concern and doubt. "Steph, we can't jump to conclusions. That bust could match 100 guys." But Stephanie was adamant. "We have to call the cops." Jim hesitated, remembering the article's details List's methodical cover-up, removing himself from family photos, draining his mother's bank account to flee. "Let's be sure," he said. "I'll talk to him, see if he slips up." Before they could act, the power cut out. The house plunged into darkness, and a shadow filled the doorway. Bob Clark, his eyes glinting like steel. "You couldn't leave me alone, could you?" he snarled, stepping inside. "I just wanted peace, but you forced my hand." Jim lunged, shouting for Stephanie to run, but Bob struck him with a pistol's butt, sending him to the floor. Stephanie screamed, backing against the wall as Bob raised the gun, his voice eerily calm. "It's time to give you up to the Almighty." The front door slammed open. Danny and Melissa, arriving for their visit, froze at the sight. "Steph!" Danny yelled, charging Bob. They grappled, the gun skittering across the floor as Melissa fumbled for her phone, dialing 911. Bob fought like a cornered animal, but Danny pinned him until sirens wailed closer. Police swarmed the house, cuffing Bob and checking Jim, who groaned, blood trickling from his temple. Stephanie rushed to her father, tears streaming. "I'm okay, kid," Jim rasped, pulling her close. At the station, Frank Clayton faced the man in custody. Fingerprints confirmed it. Bob Clark was John List. Frank's voice shook with 18 years of rage. "How could you do it?" "Your own children, Frederick, John Jr., Patricia." List's face was a mask, offering no remorse. "What will help?" Frank said, leaning close. "Is knowing you'll rot in an 8x9 cell, looking over your shoulder every day, feeling the terror your family felt." List's eyes flickered, but he said nothing. Stephanie recovered at home, her ankle still tender, but her spirit bruised. Danny stayed close, their bond deepened by the ordeal. "I was scared," he admitted, squeezing her hand. "But I wasn't going to let him hurt you." Jim, his head bandaged, hugged Stephanie tightly. "Your mother made me promise to always be there for you," he said, his voice thick. "I've been slipping, but no more. I'm here, Steph." For the first time since her mother's death, Stephanie felt a spark of hope, a chance to rebuild. Frank watched the news of List's arrest, a weight lifting from his chest. The faces of Frederick, John Jr., and Patricia, etched in his memory, seemed to soften. Justice, delayed but not denied, had come through a teenager's curiosity, a detective's stubbornness, and a nation's refusal to forget. In the quiet suburb, the shadow across the street was gone, and the light of truth shone through.